Yeah, mentally, yeah, I think there should have been, but there wasn't.
Tonight, the family of a man who died by suicide in an Edmonton prison speaks out.
Only nations have Aboriginal and treaty rights, have land rights, not organizations.
Questions swirl over a Nova Scotia Indigenous organization's membership.
I'm really good on both ends of the court, so I'm what you call like a two-way player.
And a basketball program brings hoop dreams to a remote community in northern Quebec. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The family of a man who died by suicide in an Edmonton prison are speaking out to ensure that inmates' rights are respected and to ensure that they receive proper supports while serving their sentence. APTN's Chris Stewart has more.
Tyrone Blind was in the Edmonton institution serving a 4-year, 9-month sentence for several offenses, including assault causing bodily harm, assault with a weapon, armed robbery, and drug trafficking. According to a September 2022 fatality inquiry into his death, he complained twice about severe gastrointestinal issues and told staff he was feeling suicidal about his condition. He was seen by a doctor and his medication was adjusted. According to the inquiry, 4 days later, he was put into a structured intervention unit for his safety. He was put back into his cell a day later. On January 31st, 2018, 3 days after returning to his cell, a guard doing rounds noticed that he had placed a towel covering the cell window, blocking his view of Tyrone. The guard tapped the door, and Tyrone replied that he was using the toilet. 15 minutes later, the guard opened the door and found Tyrone unresponsive. Another officer applied CPR. Emergency medical services arrived 35 minutes later. Tyrone died the next day in an Edmonton hospital. The inquiry found that a coordinated effort in the form of an multidisciplinary team meeting amongst all of Mr. Blind's care providers, including persons with case management and/or custodial duties, were not undertaken. Hence, the management of the pre-incident indicators, precipitating events, contributing risk factors, and the security intelligence information pertinent to Mr. Blind's risk for suicide and management thereof was at best fractured. Tyrone's family say they believe Tyrone did not receive the help he needed. Cherise is Tyrone's sister.
Yeah, mentally, yeah, I think there should have been, but there wasn't.
She says they feel he was not treated as a person with basic human rights.
They did a lot of wrong, like, even with his mental health, like, they just pushed that aside. Yeah, where that could, it could have been prevented.
Alira Blind is Tyrone's niece. She says workers did not see Tyrone as a person.
What happened to my uncle was a result of systemic racism and discrimination, and I just feel like mental health needs to be taken more serious.
The fatality report indicates that steps have been taken to prevent a suicide attempt in the future, such as not allowing views into cells to be obstructed and eliminating points of suspension to prevent suicide attempts.
I feel like those measures should have already been in place, and like this hasn't been the first time, and I want to do everything I can to prevent that happening to another family.
Correctional Services Canada responded to the recommendations in a public letter that said Health Services Management at the regional and site level will meet to ensure appropriate actions have been taken in response to the recommendations. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Coming up after the break, we're going to look into the allegations being made about the Native Council of Nova Scotia. Stick around. Welcome back. The Native Council of Nova Scotia is facing allegations of identity fraud. It may impact a $40 million class action lawsuit against the province over hunting rights. Angel Moore explains.
An internal report obtained by APTN News titled Indigenous Identity Fraud within NCNS alleges that more than 300 members of the Native Council of Nova Scotia, or NCNS, should be removed, something that might have an impact on their class action lawsuit. The report's author, Pierre Sabourin, wrote, "There are NCNS members whose only evidence of Indigenous ancestry is a family story from 220 years ago, or an ancestor with a last name that is only sometimes associated with Mi'kmaq people." Daryl Leroux is Associate Professor of Political Studies at the University of Ottawa. He researches the growing number of people claiming Indigenous ancestry, such as Métis groups in Eastern Canada. Leroux says the report is well researched.
This record in the ledger that's included in the report, because this individual actually went to the area and looked at these different sort of sources of information, it strongly suggests that the individual in question, the root ancestor, was born to Anglo-Saxon settlers.
The NCNS is a self-governing organization that represents over 3,500 members living off reserve, with or without status. According to the NCNS website, members self-identify as Mi'kmaq, claim ancestry and a connection to a community. Lorraine Augustine is Chief and President of the NCNS. She declined an on-camera interview, but wrote in an email statement to APTN News, "Work has been underway to review the contents of the Sabourin report, the release of which was a violation of the author's legal duty to NCNS and the members he identified. The work to date carried out by NCNS has demonstrated material errors in the work and conclusions. And NCNS has always approached the issue of Indigenous identity with the utmost care and rejects any suggestions by Mr. Sabourin that there is any tolerance for fraudulent claims." Kim Tallbear is a professor of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. She says ancestry is not enough.
Even if there's an actual ancestor 3 to 4 centuries ago, why is that a legitimate claim to being Mi'kmaq today?
In 2019, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs announced the Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq enrollment process, called Wulanaginu, This is Who We Are, developed by the Mi'kmaq Nation that determines who can access Mi'kmaq rights. Pam Palmer is a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University, and she is Mi'kmaq. Her community is Eel River Bar. Palmer is concerned about the fact that the organization gets federal funding.
That if they're getting funds from federal or provincial governments or anyone that's targeted specifically for Mi'kmaq people, they too have a legal obligation to make sure that every single cent, which is very minimal, goes to actual Mi'kmaq people.
APTN News asked Patty Haidu, Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, how the government ensures funds go to organizations that have members with proven Indigenous identity.
In fact, the Government of Canada has the responsibility to work in a distinctions-based approach that is identified by Indigenous peoples. And so, for far too long, this country has told Indigenous people who is Indigenous and how.
Sabourin wrote the report while employed at the NCNS as a Citizen Information Officer. He delivered it to the NCNS leadership when he resigned on August 8, 2023. Sabourin declined an interview request, but did confirm he wrote the report. The 200-page report says in part, 300-plus members do not meet the bylaws, and cannot prove objectively verifiable evidence of Indigenous ancestry. This is 1/3 of the active membership. This includes at least 150 ATRA passport holders, those members who have been issued a card called the Aboriginal Rights Treaty Access Passport to hunt and fish under treaty rights. The passports were developed in the 1980s as part of the NCNS harvesting plan to access the treaty right to hunt, fish, and harvest for food, social, and ceremonial purposes. NCNS Chief and President Lorraine Augustine confirmed she received the report, but rather than responding to interview requests, wrote in an email on August 31st, 2023, "The allegation of fraud is defamatory and carries serious consequences for those who this unfounded allegation is directed towards. Any third party who participates in the release of this information and publicize the defamation will also attract liability." Palmater is shocked NCNS made threats.
The substantive nature of the report is something that really should be shared with all Mi'kmaq people. All of their membership should be made public to hold themselves to account. When you don't act transparently, it makes people think you have something to hide.
NCNS members have been hunting moose in the Cape Breton area for over 30 years. In 2017, the province revoked that right. So in 2019, 4 NCNS members representing all current and former ATRA passport holders filed a class action lawsuit against the Nova Scotia government, asking for $40 million in damages and requesting the passports be reinstated. According to Darryl LaRue, NCNS has a lot to lose if they lose membership.
They're probably going on the assumption that if they were to admit that this has been going on, that it has sort of poisoned their decision-making process and will harm the lawsuit that they filed.
In the statement of claim against the province, NCNS alleges that in fall 2016, the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs complained to the province that the DNR should stop accepting ATRA passports as evidence of an Aboriginal or treaty right to hunt, and that soon after that complaint, the province declared that Aboriginal and treaty rights in Nova Scotia are collective rights held by the appropriate rights-bearing community, which corresponds to the 13 Mi'kmaq First Nations, 11 of who are represented by the Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs. The Assembly of Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs and Nova Scotia's Department of Justice would not comment as the matter is before the courts. Tallbear says identity fraud within organizations harm Indigenous rights.
Because this is one of the problems we have with pretendians. They insert themselves into positions of power. They use those identity claims in order to gain power, to gain positions, to gain access to grants, to hunting rights, to fishing rights. They're using it in order to get something.
But the passports are still accepted by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and NCNS members continue to have the right to harvest lobster for food, social, and ceremony. DFO confirmed this to APTN News in an email statement. In the case of members of the Native Council of Nova Scotia, the required proof of designation would be the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights Access Passport. Palmater says this is not right.
Only nations have Aboriginal and treaty rights, have land rights, not organizations. And the Supreme Court of Canada has been very clear that simply being a member of a political organization does not attach you to a nation or a historical community.
Chief and President Lorraine Augustine of the Native Council of Nova Scotia wrote in an email to APTN News, the NCNS will make a public statement once their review of the Sabrin report is complete. The Attorney General of Nova Scotia is appealing the class action certification in the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Thanks, Angel. Time to step aside for one more quick break. Still to come, shooting hoops in northern Quebec.
At first, it was like, it's something to do. But then over time, I kind of just fell in love with it.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And this was submitted by Lucille Paul and was her view this morning as the sun came up over the horizon in Ebb and Flow First Nation, located in southern Manitoba along the west side of Lake Manitoba. Thanks, Lucille. You can send your photos to us by using the share@aptn.ca email for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at Friday's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, partly cloudy and 15 for Halifax and Charlottetown. 8 with rain in Kuujjuaq, sun's out, and 8 in Nain. 18 in Montreal, showers, and 10 for Chibougamau. Rain and 12 in Sault Ste. Marie, rain and 14 for North Bay. 11 in Thunder Bay, 11 with rain in Sioux Lookout. +4 in Churchill, 9 in God's Lake with rain. Showers and 16 for Winnipeg, 15 with rain in Dauphin. 15 and partly sunny in Regina, 14 in Saskatoon. 14 in Meadow Lake, sun's out, and 11 for Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, 9 for High Level, 10 and sunny in Fort Chip. Sun's out, and 12 for Edmonton, 17 in Lethbridge. Showers and 15 in Vancouver, 18 in Kamloops. 9 in Prince George, 11 for Smithers. -9 with snow in Old Crow, 7 below in Whitehorse. +8 with snow in Yellowknife, 3 below in Norman Wells. Snow and 5 below in Sax Harbor. Flores and -1 in Polituck. 0 for Chesterfield, +1 in Whale Cove. -3 with snow in Resolute, 10 below in Arctic Bay. Young Inuit in northern Quebec are getting competitive with basketball, but the barriers of fly-in communities can make it difficult to sharpen your skills. Amelia Fournier has more.
Every Tuesday night, kids in Quebec and Inuit community in northern Quebec flock to the Forum to play basketball.
I'm really good on both ends of the court, so I'm what you call like a two-way player. So I'm really good on offense and defense, but I think my stronger attribute, I guess, is definitely defense.
Students like Matthew have been working hard to improve their form.
At first, it was like, it's something to do. But then over time, I kind of just fell in love with it.
Bruno Bourget, a coach from down south, says basketball gives a much-needed space for fun in the north.
For sure, it breaks the isolation, and the youths are building their own network. It's also a safe space for them. They know the gym is always open, so if they feel lonely or they want to be out of their home, they can come in the gym with their friends. They play, they have fun. Sometimes they forget what's their reality and they just play like they should do.
But playing from a small fly-in community has its challenges. Other than hockey, organized sports are still in their infancy.
When you want to get better, you got to play someone who's better than you. There's not a lot of people who play basketball here, and not a lot of people who take it super seriously.
Russ Johnson is trying to change that through his program Grind Now, Shine Later Nunavik, or GNSL, organizing competitions and workshops between villages and recruiting coaches for communities.
Student athletics is something that's fundamental, and honestly, it should have happened up here 20 years ago. It's a little ridiculous that we're at the starting stages of this stuff up here.
One of the main challenges, bringing kids from different flying communities together to compete against each other. Johnson has been organizing small tournaments and workshops between neighboring villages, like the one held in Upaluk that was supposed to include players from across Nunavik.
This week was supposed to be a group of 100 kids. When we got the flight costs, they asked us for 50 kids they wanted to pay. They wanted us to get them $150,000, which is a shocking number, to be honest, for a student activity. And we tried to get a discount, and then we were told that was with the discount.
But this event still brought Felix from Quebec and Alupa from Kangalsuk together, two 13-year-old basketball players who are now friends.
Who's your favorite basketball player?
Giannis, stiff. I even have his shoes.
The boys are fond of their homes in Nunavik.
You can go hunting anytime. You know everyone in your town. And like you can go anywhere out the land. And it's beautiful too. Yeah.
But outside of traditional activities and hockey, they say
There will be nothing to do without basketball.
Johnson is working on getting more funding and not-for-profit status for GNSL, something he hopes will reduce Nunavut's 80% high school dropout rate.
Without student athletics, I don't see things turning around because, or extracurriculars, right? Like you need something to have kids really enjoy school. Not everybody enjoys math, you know what I mean? So to have them really buy into their education, if you don't tie in something that you can use as a carrot with that stick, you know what I mean? Like a lot of kids would just walk away.
For students like Matthew, sports can make all the difference.
Basketball like gives me a reason to get up in the morning because I want to get better. One day I definitely want to play in the college level. And that's something I've been working toward every single day.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Coujouac, Quebec.
Great story. APTN Investigates returns tomorrow night with an all-new episode. And after decades of lobbying, 4 communities in Vermont have been recognized by the state as Abenaki. But Abenaki in Quebec are calling the process flawed and alleging that the groups are committing cultural identity theft on their ancestral territory. Here's a preview for People of the Dawn.
Odanak, First Nation. It was here, in the 1990s, a group of self-identified Abenaki came for a cultural exchange.
When they came to our community, we welcomed them with open arms and we taught them our culture, our language, our stories, our heritage.
Led by this man, Homer St. Francis, the Vermont group made inroads of Abenaki in Quebec.
He worked with people from Odanak. He had got agreements with chiefs.
But by the early 2000s, the exchange took a sour turn.
When we started to ask questions on who are you, how are you related to people in Odanak, how are you related to the Abenaki Nation, they had no answers.
Even today, we're being prosecuted and persecuted for being who we are and with just an opinion and nobody else's authority to have the, to stand in judgment of us.
Copies of Wabanaki Confederacy belts.
Now, Vermont groups are state recognized as Abenaki. They outnumber the Abenaki based in Quebec. And leadership at Odanak is wondering who will decide the future of the Abenaki Nation.
I struggle with the fact that if we don't fight what's happening right now, my children will have to have that battle.
And you can catch the rest of APTN Investigates People of the Dawn right here tomorrow night, immediately following the APTN National News. Over to Ottawa now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a look at tonight's Nation to Nation.
Ani, I'm Annette Francis. Tonight on Nation to Nation, Senator Kim Pate wants to establish a guaranteed livable income. She tells me what that would look like. Also, Democracy Watch released 1,800 pages of information on the SNC Lavalin scandal, looking specifically at how the RCMP investigated it for possible criminal charges. Here's how Democracy Watch co-founder Duff Conacher described that investigation.
The RCMP rolled over like a negligently weak lapdog.
And First Nation students from 9 communities around the Toronto area have access to tuition-free education. That's coming up after the news.
Good stuff. Thanks, Annette. You can watch Nation to Nation right here in less than 2 minutes' time. And if you missed it, you can also find it and anything else you may have missed, and much more, over on our APTN News YouTube page and on our website, aptnnews.ca. That's all the time we have for your news for this Thursday. I'm Dennis Ward-Marcy. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.